Fred realized he'd made a huge mistake, and now the owner of the Fashili firm where he worked wanted to see him. He got up from his chair and went to Bill Robinson's office, feeling nervous. There was no way Bill could have found out what he'd done as the accountant and general manager. Manager Fred was the only one who looked into the nitty-gritty of the company's transactions, making sure all the accounts balanced at the end of each month. Fred felt a cold sweat and a sense of nausea as he knocked on Bill's door reluctantly. He told himself that Bill never looked into the detailed accounts unless there was something wrong with them. There was a clear discrepancy in the balance sheets. Bill was always more preoccupied with his designer suits, fast cars, and chasing women. As Fred entered, he saw Bill's serious expression and realized he was in trouble. "So I suppose the question I need to ask is, how long have you been embezzling from me?" Bill's voice was stern. Fred's head was spinning. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he blurted out, his denials flowing without conviction. However, Bill produced the transaction logs, which proved that a significant amount of money had spent some time in one of Fred's personal accounts before being paid back into the company. Fred knew the jig was up. He had been caught red-handed. "I'm really sorry, Bill." Fred confessed that he just needed a short-term loan. "I took out a term loan until the bridging company came through. Otherwise, we would have lost the new house Lucy had set her heart on. I never intended to steal it. I paid it back as soon as I could and before the end of the month. They might call it Fred theft or fraud, but you could be looking at jail time, even without that. You're looking at losing your job. I can't possibly trust you after this," Bill stated solemnly. "Please give me a chance. I know it was a mistake. I've worked for the company for almost 20 years and have never thought of doing anything like this before. I wouldn't do it again," Fred pleaded with Bill, who stood and looked out the window, seemingly lost in deep contemplation. "You and Lucy have been my friends for a long time. I guess that makes this all the more disappointing." "Did Lucy know you did this?" Fred was taken aback by the question. Fred thought back to the question. It was actually Lucy's idea. She was so desperate not to lose the house that she suggested it. She'd convinced Fred that no one could ever find out. Fred thought that involving Lucy might mean Bill wouldn't report it to the police, but he didn't want to implicate her. After a long pause, he said, "No, she didn't." Bill seemed surprised by Fred's response, but let it pass. "I need time to think this through," he said. "Fred, I'm not sure what to do for the best. I think you should go home for the rest of the week. I'll make a decision on Friday." Fred couldn't figure out how Bill had found out. No one ever looked at the transactions, and Bill certainly didn't delve into details. His primary concern was which option Bill would choose. None of them were very appealing, but the shame of a court case and time in prison left him in a blind panic. He was suddenly overcome with panic. He knew Lucy wouldn't be expecting him. As he approached their new home, he looked around and deeply regretted buying the place in the first place. He suddenly recalled all those stories where a guy comes home early to find his wife having an affair. Wouldn't that just cap off a perfect day? As he walked into the kitchen, Fred was relieved to find Lucy her usual bright and sunny self, fully clothed. He couldn't help but marvel at her. She was as beautiful as ever, just shy of her 40th birthday. Her long, curly brown hair was pinned up, her fringe resting over a pair of deep brown eyes. He found her figure more appealing now, with a few more curves and a lot more cleavage than when they were first married. But above all, he loved her smile. He feared he might soon remove it for the foreseeable future. Fred updated Lucy on his discussions with Bill and the damning evidence. He'd found out that, "God, honey, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. It was my idea. I told Billy you didn't know anything. There's no point in getting us both into trouble. Maybe if I spoke to him and pleaded," Lucy suggested. Fred thought about it and suggested they wait. He knew the next 3 days were going to be the longest of his life. They could try pleading if Bill chose to go the destructive route. Fred thought about it and suggested they wait. He knew the next 3 days were going to be the longest of his life. They could try pleading if Bill chose to go the destructive route. Fred wondered what he would do if he were in Bill's shoes. They were friends outside of work, often going out and attending parties together. Maybe that would give him a chance. Bill texted to say he would come to their home at 7 p.m. On Friday, Fred and Lucy were both feeling pretty nervous. Bill's Porsche 911 turned up right on time. Fred thought about how the man had it all: looks, money, the ability to charm, and now the power to destroy him. He greeted Bill with a bit of a strained smile, while Lucy offered him a beer as usual. Bill could say anything. "Fred Duvin, I just want to say how very sorry I am, Bill. I let you and myself down badly. I understand I've put you in an impossible position, and I'll cope with whatever you decide." Bill gave a strange smile. "I do hope that's true." Fred, the following silence stretched on, becoming unbearable before Bill spoke again. Finally, he spoke again. "You know, Fred, I'm a bit jealous of you and Lucy. I miss that in my life." Fred was surprised. He always thought Bill had it all, including an endless line of hot girlfriends. Maybe nearing 30 he was looking to settle down. So, with that in mind, he had a proposal for them both. "I think you'll like it, but it's the only way you can avoid a prison sentence, Fred. And remember, there's a risk to Lucy as well. It was a joint account, and used to secure the house in both your names. I know you wouldn't have done this without her approval." Fred panicked at the thought of Lucy being held accountable. Bill let out a slow, long breath. "There's no easy way to say this, but my proposal involves spending time with Lucy." There was stunned silence. Bill continued, "No police, no court cases or prison. You stay employed and you two stay together, but I get to spend every Friday night with her?" "You must be joking," Fred said. "I'm dead serious. I've wanted Lucy for all these years, and this is an opportunity I just can't resist," Bill replied. "There must be another option. We can pay more back anything, but this is my only offer," Bill said. "I'm told I'm not a... The guy looks pretty rough. Hopefully it won't be too much of a hassle for you. Maybe we can think it over and come to a decision together. We need time to consider it." "We can't decide something like this quickly," Lucy said. Fred's head was spinning. "Are you crazy? Are you really thinking of agreeing to this?" "I don't see any other options, Fred, and we've been trying to think of them all week," Lucy replied. Fred looked at Bill and said, "You miserable life scum, it's a sick idea." Bill smiled. "That may be true, Fred, but I'm not a thief." "You are, though." Turning to Lucy, Bill said, "If we're doing this, we need to start now. There's no time for..." After 15 minutes of shouting and accusations, Bill stood up and said, "It's decision time. I'm either going to walk out to my car or upstairs with Lucy." He held out his hand towards her, but after a hesitation, Lucy took it. Fred was literally staggered and sat back harshly on the chair. "There's no other option, Fred." "It'll be fine," Lucy said, then led Bill through the living room and up the stairs. For Fred, time seemed to stop. Had this conversation really just happened? His thoughts jumped to what was happening upstairs. He heard them moving around, muffled. Then he heard a conversation, and the sound of someone sitting on the bed. Long minutes passed in silence. Then he heard the first creak of the bed, the unmistakable sound of two people lying on it. The movements and sounds continued, then the creaking became regular, faster and louder. It seemed to go on forever. He thought he might go mad. Then the sound stopped, and that meant only one thing: Bill had achieved his goal. Fred felt overwhelmed, both by shame and guilt, as he dried his cheeks and eyes, expecting Bill and Lucy to return downstairs again. There was muffled conversation and movement after a long silence. Fred stood there, thinking he needed to check on Lucy when he heard the bed squeaking again. He had to get out of the house. He rushed out and walked aimlessly. Had she actually enjoyed it, or was she putting on a show for Bill? He started to wonder how vigorously she had argued against the idea. She was 10 years his junior, and by the time he reached the park, Fred realized that Lucy was doing this to keep him out of jail. He needed to get back to the house and make sure she was okay. The Porsche was still there, but the house was quiet as he entered. He went through to the kitchen and he turned and saw Lucy behind him, dressed only in a short robe. They looked at each other, both feeling a little embarrassed. Before Fred could speak, Lucy said, "Are you okay?" She gave a flicker of a smile and said, "I am, thanks for checking." She then continued, "He's acting normal, nothing rude or weird." Fred shrugged. "At least," he said. "It's over," Lucy said, looking a bit awkward. "Actually, he wants to go again. He was thirsty, so I came for a beer, and I wanted to check on you." "Jesus, he must have been saving this up for you," Fred remarked. Lucy suggested, "Why don't you go to the den? It might be easier for you, quieter. Maybe you can think of a way out of this." Fred spent another hour in the den, but he hadn't made any progress on a solution when he heard footsteps descending the stairs. He stepped into the hall and saw Bill, who was struggling to hide a smile. Before he spoke, he broke the tense silence. "Listen, I know this isn't easy for you, Fred. I promised to treat Lucy with the utmost respect, and I really appreciate you allowing me to spend time with her. I hope it gets easier for you, and our work issues will remain between us." "Don't thank me," Fred replied. "You left us no choice at all, Bill and Lucy." Fred was clearly uncomfortable. It was time for him to leave. He was surprised when Bill said goodbye and kissed Lucy. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but it was on the lips and lingered for a moment before Fred could react. Bill had already left. He turned to Lucy. What was that all about? Lucy realized she had made a mistake. It was just a goodbye kiss. It was more than that. It was a sign of affection. "I suppose you had a good time after all. I shouldn't have been so concerned." Lucy was angry. She said, "I can't believe your boss just slept with me. Because of your actions, you're worried about a goodbye kiss." Fred replied, "It's supposed to be a deal. An arrangement. Did you make out with him upstairs?" "I guess not much." Lucy said, "Great. First it's multiple times. Then I hear you enjoying it. And now it's affection." Fred retorted, "Lucy, it's not like that. Everything I'm doing is, to keep us out of jail, I have to show willingness and make sure he enjoys it. Plus, I can't help but react if he's doing that to me. It's not exactly something I can control. We both need to adjust to this. If I can put myself through this, then you need to find a way to cope with it too." Fred felt drained after the last comment. Despite his doubts about Lucy's actions, she was the one making the sacrifice, not him. If she left, where would he be? It was probably in jail, facing the master bedroom, that Fred would have ended up if he hadn't made the decision he did. He knew what had happened, so they slept in the guest room, holding each other close. Lucy fell asleep quickly, clearly exhausted, but Fred lay awake all night, his mind swirling with thoughts. He was desperate to find a way out of this nightmare. The following week felt like they barely spoke. Their conversation centered on how to escape their predicament. They came up with all kinds of plans, but most of them didn't work. Even when Fred thought of a solution, Bill was one step ahead. For example, Fred suggested destroying all the evidence. But Bill had already cut off Fred's access to the backups and backed up all the financials to a new, secure cloud system. Finally, Friday arrived. Bill texted Fred to say he was taking Lucy out for a meal. Fred wasn't sure that was a good idea. On the one hand, a date felt more like a normal relationship, but on the other, it meant less time in bed with Lucy. As it turned out, he got the worst of both scenarios. Lucy seemed subdued about the date, but she got ready anyway. Fred thought she put in too much effort and looked too good when Bill arrived to pick her up. Watching her in a little black dress and slingbacks, being helped into Bill's Porsche 911. The evening that followed was even worse. Fred sent Lucy several texts, asking if she was okay. She replied with short answers, saying she was fine, just having a meal or drinks. They eventually returned at 10 p.m. Bill had his arm around Lucy as they entered, laughing and seemingly in a good mood. Fred's glare intensified as Lucy appeared to be enjoying herself a bit too much, clearly intoxicated. "We never agreed these were dates." Fred muttered. Bill replied, "Relax, Fred, it was just dinner and drinks between friends. If this is going to be awkward, maybe we better go straight up." Fred say, "What do you mean by straight up?" Bill's smile returned. The deal was every Friday. Fred, "So, I'll be staying with Lucy tonight. I'm sure you can manage in the spare room." Despite her inebriation, Lucy sensed the tension and worried Fred might confront Bill. Lucy steered him into the kitchen, whispering, "It'll be okay. I'll handle it quickly and then pretend to be passed out. We don't have much choice. I'm feeling powerless." Fred retreated to the den upstairs. He heard Lucy's giggles, hoping they were just for show, but he couldn't shake the thought that they might be for Bill, or worse for him. Exhausted, Fred finally fell asleep in the spare room. Each time he woke up, he heard the bed squeaking down the hall. So much for a quick resolution in the morning. Fred found Bill already at the table, and Lucy making breakfast. He'd had enough. "Back off," he told Bill. "It's not Friday, and your time is up. Fred cut Lucy off before she could speak. "You have 10 seconds to get out of my house," he said. Bill looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He wanted to argue, but decided to leave instead. As he left, he threw a reminder at Fred. "Don't forget what's at stake here." Fred turned to Lucy, making him breakfast. "You've got to be kidding me. Why don't you just move him in? You're more his wife than mine now." He stormed out before she could even reply. This was the third consecutive Friday. Bill suggested they spend the night at a hotel to avoid further confrontations with Fred. Lucy left at 10 to midnight. 6 p.m. Dressed casually, hoping to make things easier on Fred again. The plan was to change at the hotel, and Bill would meet her in the restaurant upon arriving. Lucy was surprised by the opulence of the hotel. Her casual attire seemed out of place. She picked up the key for she'd booked a room, only to find out it was a suite. There was a box on the bed containing a very expensive and glamorous full-length silver satin dress with a scoop neck and thigh-high slit. Lucy was hesitant at first, but she decided to try it on. It fit perfectly and she felt stunning in it. She decided to keep it on and headed down to the restaurant. Bill was speechless at how stunning Lucy looked when he met her. The dinner and wine that followed were exquisite, with a charged atmosphere. She knew what was to come later. Lucy felt more at ease with Bill. She decided to go along with the scenario rather than resist it. When she returned to the room, she realized that Bill was an attentive and passionate lover. He exuded confidence in all areas, which was a new experience for her. The next morning, Lucy changed back into her casual clothes. She explained to Bill that she couldn't risk taking the dress home. Bill agreed to keep it at his house for Lucy to use in the future. Lucy sighed. She recognized that this arrangement would be long-term. She was confused about how she really felt. She was feeling guilty, but she also felt excited and fulfilled. Fred spent most of Friday night lying awake, and by Saturday morning at 10:12 a.m., Lucy still hadn't returned. She'd broken their agreement. Fred doubted Bill would have resisted taking Lucy again that morning. He wasn't convinced she'd even tried to avoid it. He was losing trust in Lucy. If that happened, it could mean the end of his marriage. He'd never felt so distant from Lucy. Lucy thought back to the kiss that had turned out to be a huge mistake, upsetting Fred more than anything else. Then there was the breakfast with Bill. What was she thinking? She was starting to believe the whole arrangement was a terrible idea from her perspective. Her time with Bill was easier than expected. He was respectful, handsome, and more. And it was exciting, and the money and cars certainly added to the overall package. She had always longed for the finer things. She had hoped Fred would adjust to the situation and come to his senses, but 3 weeks had passed and he was still just as moody. She loved him dearly, and regretted the predicament they were now in. She had tried to reassure Fred that she was managing. She told Fred that Bill was treating her well, and wasn't trying to keep them apart, but it made no difference. Fred seemed defeated, and lost his once steady, reassuring presence in her life. When Bill arrived at work on Monday, he told Fred that he needed to cover an out-of-town training event on Wednesday. On Thursday, Fred immediately had suspicions, but given his unstable work position, he had no choice but to agree to cover it. "I can cover it, but just to be clear, this doesn't affect our personal arrangement." "You can't visit when I'm away," Fred said firmly. Bill replied, "No, of course not." That night, when Fred informed Lucy, she didn't seem Fred was particularly surprised and concerned. Training events weren't uncommon, occurring once or twice a year, but this all felt too convenient to him. He retreated to the den, planning a way out of the predicament. Wearing against a blinding headache, he climbed the stairs to find some painkillers. He overheard Lucy on the phone, catching only her sigh. He couldn't help but wonder who she was talking to, and listened in on her part of the conversation. "What are you doing sending Fred away?" "No, it's a terrible idea. This situation isn't working out and your presence will only make it worse. He hasn't come up with any other solutions. It seems like he's given up and resigned to things. I didn't think it would end like this. He's really upset. I suggested it, but I didn't think he'd be this upset. It was supposed to be a safe alternative to having an affair without the risk of being caught. I didn't mean for all of this to happen. I didn't help matters with the kisses and breakfasts. You've been unnecessarily cocky at times, flaunting it in his face. Fine, you can come over during the trip, but then I think we'll have to dial it back and be more discreet, or maybe even end it if you're willing to end things because you see how it's affecting Fred. Then you can be the good guy and we can go back to normal. Perhaps if we're discreet, we could still meet occasionally. We'll talk later, but I really need to mend things with Fred. I still love him." Fred staggered back down the stairs, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Did he really just hear all of that? He couldn't quite grasp all the implications. It was no surprise that Bill seemed. Lucy was keeping him informed ahead of time to anticipate all his plans. She had suggested it from the start, and persuaded Fred to borrow the money, even though he had better things to do with his money. That's how Bill found the discrepancy in the first place. It was so well hidden that he didn't think even an audit could uncover it. He was in fact married to a con artist. Thoughts of revenge and violence raced through his mind. His mind was all over the place. He knew he had to calm down and think rationally. He needed a plan where they would feel some of his pain. Fred avoided Lucy for the rest of the night and the following morning. When he saw Lucy on Tuesday night, he didn't mention the overheard conversation. Instead, he said he'd heard Bill at work bragging about having a first-class mistress. Fred continued, saying he could only hope Bill hadn't mentioned Lucy by name. Fred left early for the trip on Wednesday with Lucy. He told her he loved her and managed a brief smile, pretending to be distracted by checking his schedule on his phone as he set off. Bill arrived at Lucy's later on Wednesday morning, and she immediately asked about the boasting, but Bill denied all knowledge of it, accusing Fred of stirring things up. Lucy wasn't sure who to believe and couldn't see any reason for Fred to make that up. Maybe Bill was less discreet than she thought, which would be problematic. They discussed the situation and what Lucy didn't have the same emotional connection with Bill that she had with Fred. Their relationship had also become purely physical. Before leaving on Thursday afternoon, Bill convinced Lucy to continue their affair. However, Lucy made it clear that it would be their last time together until they got their relationship with Fred in order. As Bill left the house, he froze in disbelief at the sight before him. Embedded in the gleaming hood of his Porsche 911 was a large kitchen knife. He stood there and looked around, but he couldn't see anyone. All 4 tires had been slashed. He went back inside and told Lucy. They were both worried that Fred had come back early and seen something. It seemed like it was probably just kids or someone who didn't like the car. Lucy called Fred to ask about his course. He said it was boring and that he was on his way back. He didn't ask about Bill and sounded calm. Lucy thought that maybe it was just kids after all. It was probably just kids after all. Either way, they needed to get the car back in one piece before Fred got back. This meant frantic calls and some pretty hefty fees. Everything seemed back to normal when Fred got back on Thursday night. Lucy played the part of the dutiful wife, but it came as a surprise when Bill messaged to say he was going to come over on Friday to discuss things. Lucy hoped Bill would end things. Maybe the incident with the car had shaken him enough. Friday morning, Fred left for work as usual at 11:12 a.m. 15:00. He called Lucy in a panicked voice, urging her to see something he'd received via their personal email. Lucy opened the email on her phone, located the message and played the video, despite its poor quality and short duration. It was clear what Lucy and Bill were doing in the bedroom, and the sender was an anonymous address. Fred looked at the video on his phone. "I'm not sure when that would be from. Lucy knows exactly what it was from Wednesday." She responded calmly, "I'm not sure. Maybe it's edited and they messed with the light." "Is that you, Fred?" he asked, observing Lucy in the video. "You seem to be enjoying it." "I'm not sure," Lucy replied. "I can explain later." She had more pressing concerns at the moment. She could explain her enthusiasm to Fred later, as part of an act for Bill. What is Bill up to? Is this what he wanted to discuss tonight? Is this just another form of torture? Did you fall out or threaten him? Fred's questions came one after another. Lucy immediately denied it, but then remembered. Lucy told Bill about her plan to stop things. Maybe he had a bad reaction and planned to use the video to keep things going. He must have set up a video at some point. He had plenty of chances over the past 2 days. Fred said Bill wasn't at work, so he couldn't ask him. Lucy really wanted to contact him and still hoped to cover their activities. Just then, Lucy's phone pinged with an urgent, "Call me now" message from her sister Mandy. She told Fred she'd better answer it, hoping it would give her some much-needed thinking time. She ended the call with Fred and dialed Mandy, only to be greeted by a barrage of questions and expletives. When Mandy finally paused for breath, Lucy managed to find out if her sister had received the same video clip. Her phone was blowing up with calls from most of her close friends, and even her mum. This was a disaster. There was no way Fred would do this to me. Lucy was furious and tried calling Bill repeatedly, but couldn't get a reply. While Lucy was unaware of it, Fred had picked up Bill's phone at work during a meeting, removed the battery and discarded it. He kept the handset and SIM card. Additionally, Fred left an envelope on Bill's desk before making the call to Lucy about the video and quietly leaving work when he got home. Fred thoroughly enjoyed watching his wife's angst and confusion. Lucy was really upset at the thought that her family and friends might think she was having an affair, especially her mum. Fred played along, offering various useless suggestions on how to limit the damage. He was a bit confused about when the clip could have possibly been taken. However, Lucy still wasn't admitting to Bill's midweek visit. How had everything gone so wrong? She'd never considered having an affair until that night at the party when she'd had a few drinks and flirted with Bill. He was charming and attractive, and it was clear he was interested. Since then, he'd been on her mind more often than she'd cared to admit. Over the following weeks, she'd managed to justify it to herself. She told herself that she deserved some excitement, but she couldn't risk her marriage to Fred. She had seen a friend's marriage fall apart after a similar affair was discovered, but she always considered herself smarter. She believed her plan was a clever way to avoid all the pitfalls of getting caught. After all, how could Fred discover something he already knew about planning? The details became part of the thrill for her. From her perspective, it was a perfect arrangement. She never fully considered the impact on Fred. Now she found herself in a world of pain. Everyone adored Fred, and now they would all know she had betrayed him. The thought of facing the consequences made her grimace. Nobody would believe that Fred was aware, but none of that mattered as long as she could convince Fred that this wasn't her fault. Bill's arrival at Fred and Lucy's home was announced by screeching tires. He was met by Lucy's attempt to attack him, with Fred doing nothing to intervene. His cheek was marked by an impressive scratch after finally managing to pin Lucy against a wall to speak. Bill said he wasn't involved in the video, even though he'd heard about it. Lucy asked who else could have done it, and there was tension in the room. Fred laughed and said, "I suppose that would be me." Both Lucy and Bill were surprised, but Bill understood the situation first. "So you found out about our meeting this week?" he asked Fred, who confirmed. Yes, unfortunately, Lucy tried to justify the video as part of their arrangement, but Bill realized what it really meant. He knew they'd discussed everything, suspecting Fred had recorded it all, trying to do damage control. He apologized to Fred, admitting he'd made a mistake. "I'm sorry, Fred. I couldn't resist Lucy. I never meant for this to hurt you. I made a big mistake in judgment and got carried away. I'll end the arrangement and overlook the financial irregularity." Fred replied, "Ah, that's very kind of you, but unfortunately it's all a bit too late. You'll find my resignation on your desk." Lucy interjected, "You can't leave. Fred, how will we pay for the house?" "Don't worry about that, Lucy. It's going up for sale tomorrow." "The sale is happening tomorrow, Fred. The bill is going up." "There's no need for that, Fred. We can put this behind us. I really need you at the firm. You know the business and the clients inside out." Fred smiled. "I've got a week's notice, so I won't be coming back." Fred's fake smile faded as he continued, "I suspect a good portion of the workforce will follow me too. I've informed them of my departure, and many don't seem to believe you're capable of keeping the company afloat. Bill tried to rally you. You need to think this through, Fred. You could still go to prison." Fred chuckled. "Oh, I highly doubt that. Would you want to implicate your lover? She received half of the benefits of the fraud. You've also committed blackmail. Thanks to our chat here, I have that admission on video. It's amazing what electronic devices you can buy these days. The recording is with my lawyer. In addition, you might find some of your files have been accidentally deleted. I know you didn't back anything up. It pays to have colleagues who enjoy working with you, but I suppose you wouldn't know that." Bill sneered that the recording won't stand up. In court, Fred responded, "Interesting. My lawyer echoed the same sentiment, but I can use it in other ways." By the time it's over, you'll likely be out of business. On the bright side, my new firm might be interested in acquiring you. I hear their new chief operating officer is a decent guy." Lucy realized that Bill's business and money were in serious jeopardy. She decided to pin it all on Bill. Bill listened in disbelief as Lucy launched into an impressive, "It was an act of a wronged woman. Fred, I love you. This was all Bill's idea. He made me do it. I admit I got confused and carried away, but I was just going along with it to save you from prison. I didn't really have a choice, and because of that my life is in ruins. Please, Fred, I love you." Bill muttered, "You two-faced liar." Fred smiled at the rather apt description. "My dear, loving wife, in addition to the video. You're overlooking the fact that I overheard you on the phone. Admitting this was all your idea. A rather elaborate and cruel cover for an affair. You'll find divorce papers in the envelope in the kitchen drawer. You're leaving tonight and will agree to the terms of the divorce. If you don't, there'll be more of those video clips finding their way to family and friends. I'm sure your mom will love to hear that not only are you a cheat, but the extent to which you plotted and blackmailed Lucy." She burst into tears and slumped to the floor. Fred looked at Bill. "Do you want to take her with you?" Bill replied, "Not a chance. She's more trouble than she's worth." Fred said, "Well, on that we are agreed." Bill warned, "This isn't over." Fred replied, "That's true." Fred swung for Bill. He wasn't sure who was more surprised as his fist crunched squarely into Bill's jaw, felling him on the spot. The part where Bill and Lucy were fretting over whether he'd discovered the truth and lost his sanity was delightfully melodramatic. It brought his first genuine smile in weeks. He took up the new job with Bill's rival and quickly gained customers and employees. Bill clung bitterly to his failing business, but eventually had to concede defeat and put his firm into administration. Rumors swirled about personal matters. Bill went bankrupt and shortly afterwards moved away from the area. Lucy found herself in a small flat, using the money from the sale of their house as her sole income. She had few qualifications or experience, and was forced to juggle 2 temporary jobs on 0-hour contracts, barely making ends meet. Her former friends turned their backs on her, and her relationship with her family dwindled to barely a whisper. With his increase in Reed's salary and bonuses, Fred was able to cut back to a 3-day workweek. Day workweek, he finally made time for the sports and outdoor activities he had neglected during his marriage. He hadn't realized how much Lucy had influenced his decisions, including buying a large house and filling it with possessions. He wasted no time, he sold it, and stayed in touch with Lucy's family, particularly Mandy, who kept apologizing for her sister's affair. Fred couldn't help, but he'd always wondered what Mandy meant by suggesting she'd never make the same mistake. The thought of teasing out that meaning, especially to see Lucy's reaction, amused him greatly. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. If you haven't already, feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.